Sam Lelouch, thanks for joining me on the podcast again. You're coming back.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Really good, really good. And we've had a lot of discussions about all kinds of different topics in this industry, but I feel like the one that is, it's a recurring issue. It's probably the biggest pain point. You've said this. One of the biggest pain points in the industry is just this whole topic of makeup lessons. I feel like, a lot of people have talked about it. There's a lot of articles out there. There's coaching programs that say theirs is better than this one, and this. It's like at the end of the day, I kind of feel like everybody kind of has their own spin on it, and
Right.
for some people their experience of trying different things has led them to concluding of approaching, whether they do no makeups or whether they have some variation of that, or maybe there's some schools have it to where they get credits, makeup credits, a certain number per quarter, whether it's 2 or 3 per quarter. Just the whole
Yeah.
spectrum of a lot of different ways of doing it. And I'd really like to kind of pick your brain today on your approach and kind of how you view it. You wrote an article on it, which is great. I'll definitely make sure and share that in the show notes. But let's talk about this. So,
Yeah.
where do you want to start?
Yeah, it's such a big topic. I'm gonna try to be as structured as I can about it. And I have so many thoughts. And I've been telling you before, makeups, I feel, at least for me in my personal experience and in the conversations I have with different school owners over the years, is really what I think one of the biggest challenge for music schools. It's also very specific to music schools. And I think that's probably inherently to the fact that music schools are primary, or not always, but primary private lessons, right? So, and of course, you can deal with makeups in different ways for private or group lessons. That also applies in that topic. But at least for me, if you remember my story, when I met my wife, who was the music school owner, at the time she had about only 150 students. Our topic all every day like was, oh, we have this drama about makeups. This parent is complaining or dropping because they want makeups and they want to cancel lessons. And it was like I quickly identified that, at least for my wife's school, even at only 100 something students, makeups was the biggest point of friction, the biggest trying to find the right way to do things without alienating customers, and providing the service that we're selling at the end of the day, but with some level of flexibility. And so, yeah, so that's been I think one of the biggest pain point I've experienced at my school, and which I think we kind of quote unquote solved. Um, and also, when I talk to music school owners, there's so many different approaches to it. And as I told you before, when I decided to build Opus One IO, one of the main reasons was having a platform that handles makeups in a way that I found was more efficient. Because one of the many problems that we had with the software that we used before was how we were dealing with the makeups with it, and I can explain some of those. But so if we kind of look at the what I call the spectrum, right? You have what I found in the industry, and try to apply this to my own school as well, is you have kind of a spectrum, right, where we have different policies for dealing with makeups, right? And everybody knows when we talk about makeup lessons in the industry, basically somebody wants to cancel a lesson, do they get a makeup for it, right? What do they get instead if they cancel their lesson? And of course, we can talk a little bit about second part also, what happens with a teacher. The makeup is because of a teacher absence, right? Because that's also comes into the whole picture that you have to think holistically, right? So the spectrum is basically, as you said, on one side, you're going to have schools that do no makeups at all, like the most extreme, no makeup whatsoever. Um, and it's, there is a rationale for it, right? I mean, you're providing a service and your teacher makes their time. You need to pay your teacher on a regular basis, a stable salary. And um, you don't have necessarily the staff, the time to deal with a lot of rescheduling. And you basically say, we're not going to do makeups. If you miss your lesson, you miss it. You paid for it. Teacher still gets paid. You miss your lesson. It's your problem. Now, that's one way to do things, a little bit extreme. What I think happens when you do that is you leaving tons of business or tons of money on the table, because you only cater to a very, very narrow chunk of your industry. You basically cater to the students, and there are some, thank God, I guess, that will always prioritize piano or guitar or their music lessons above everything else, all the other school activities or kids activities, sports, soccer, whatever they may do. And when they either only do piano and nothing else, or maybe they do other activities, but piano will always be something that takes precedence, right? If there's no soccer tournament that will take precedence of a piano, they will never have a reason to cancel that lesson. Those are maybe the most serious and dedicated students. But that's only a small part of your industry, of your market. So, and that's completely fine if that's what you want to do. I mean, I've seen schools that do no makeups and they have maybe not that many students, but they have very advanced, very dedicated, maybe piano or violin, classically trained students who stay for years. And that's the market they cater. Again, completely fine if you want to only focus on a small size of your market right now. And I'll talk about the different degrees, but now if you look at the complete opposite of the spectrum, you have schools kind of like where we were back then before we had Opus One IO, where I was saying, okay, well, I want to cater to the widest possible industry. I want everybody to have access to music lessons. I want to have not just the super serious, dedicated, classically trained piano students that's going to do this and nothing else. I want to get as many students as possible, whether they stay for 6 months or 6 years, it doesn't matter. We want everybody to have access to music. So we want to cast a wider net and have more students. And to do that, we understand that kids and parents are very busy. There's tons of other activities that are going to be competing at some point. There's going to be school events. There's going to be all kinds of things that are certain vacations that will warrant for customers to want to have flexibility, and not obviously every other week or too many times, but they will once in a while will need to cancel lessons, and they don't want to pay for lessons they're not having, right? So what do you do in that case, right? So at the time, what we did at my school is we said, okay, we're going to try to offer that flexibility. And that was a way to cast a wider net. As I said, I get more students in, those students that also do other activities and have other things going on, but they still want to learn music. But we're going to give them flexibility, and we're going to give them a way to have a makeup lesson, right? A private makeup lesson. Basically, whatever they paid for, with certain limitation, they'll be able to cancel lessons, and get a makeup lesson, right? So what I call a flexible and generous, or a flexible and generous private lesson makeup policy. Now, the problem you face in that end of the spectrum is it's unmanageable. You get hundreds of emails, hundreds of SMS, hundreds of calls, and especially at certain peak season where there is school holidays or school events, it becomes quickly unmanageable. I mean, at my school at that time, we were using Pike 13 at the time. We had about maybe 400 students. And even then, it was becoming like, it was, so we were offering that flexibility. We were taking the hit. We were, rescheduling lessons left and right over email and not SMS at the time yet, but over email and calls. And what was happening is we had a flexible policy. Parents liked it, but very, very difficult to handle. Doesn't scale, right? Doesn't scale very well. We were burning out through staff because they were constantly dealing with makeup rescheduling. When you have 400 students, you'll have, always like emails and emails and emails to deal with. Because humans are humans, they're gonna make mistakes, right? So they're gonna book a lesson at the wrong time and make mistakes. That's gonna happen when you handle a volume of stuff manually.
Yeah.
And you end up with angry school owner that feel like the staffs are making mistake. You're getting staff that burn out and eventually leave because they don't want to deal with that's such a busy workload, and so it doesn't scale very well, right? So the problem is you have those two extremes where you want to, on one side you don't provide any flexibility, but you have a very small size of your market. On the other side, you want to provide flexibility, differentiate your school from other school, provide that customer service and that next level experience that makes you better. And I'll talk about why that's important in a minute, but in a completely unmanageable way, right? So now in between, you have different shades, right? Different variants of that, right? You have school that do, and because that's kind of the situation, of course, I'm going to talk about why Opus One IO makes this better, but you're going to have different ways that people cope with that, right? So they have to find the acceptable place they want to be on that spectrum. And so you'll have, like I said, the no makeup school. You're gonna have schools that do, okay, we're gonna do no makeups, but we're gonna give you a recorded lesson. You had an episode with the folks at Lesson Mates, a very good friend of ours. Love the product. We have a lot of customers who use Lesson Mate. So you can use Lesson Mate. There's different ways you can share a recorded lesson instead of a makeup lesson, or a group makeup. So instead of a private makeup, you're getting a group makeup, right? So you trade your private lesson that you missed for a group lesson, etc. So you have different variants in between, and I've seen schools try different things, and I've seen schools, on that spectrum, right? Now, if I'm going to ask you something, right? If you're a customer and you try two schools, right, and the facilities are comparable, the teachers are both great, you had a good experience at both schools, and the pricing is about the same, but on one school, we'll tell you, well, if you miss your lesson, tough luck, you're not getting it, or you're getting nothing, or maybe you're getting something else that's not exactly what you paid for initially.
Right.
And the other school, they tell you, well, we have virtually unlimited rescheduling, and you can reschedule your lessons. We'll talk about how we handle the rescheduling, right? But if you have to compare, very similar products, similarly priced, similar service, on one case, that 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 10 times a year, depending how busy you are with all different activities, you're going to be missing lessons for different reasons. And on the other side, you're not going to miss those lessons. You're going to get what you paid for at a different time with some ways to reschedule your lessons. Which one are you going to pick?
Well, I would definitely pick the one that's going to give me the highest value, right? Yeah, the more flexibility, right?
So that was my thinking, and what I want to say, before we get into the different ways to do makeups and stuff, and that, if you want to differentiate your school, how do you differentiate your school, right? Honestly, I mean, you can have great teachers, but other schools have great teachers too. Let's face it, right? There's going to be teachers more or less good, and you can more or less experienced, more or less coached and mentored, but there's going to be great teachers, and there's also other teachers that are teaching private at their home, right? So you're competing with other teachers teaching private, you're competing with other schools that provide different level of service and quality of lessons. But to be honest, to be completely fair, and I'd like to see what people agree or disagree, but you can hire great teachers and pay them a little bit more and all that stuff, but there's going to be other great teachers at other schools, right? So how do you differentiate your school versus the next door school, right? It's going to be maybe like better facilities, okay, but that's easy to get nice carpet, nice decoration, and other things like that, and maybe better pianos, right? That's also as a cost. Recital. So there's all kinds of things you do to differentiate your school, but at the end of the day, the customer service, the experience for the parents on how they deal with your school, especially when they're gonna inevitably miss lessons, is one of the biggest opportunity for your school to differentiate from others, right? Because in terms of just value, right? Now, some argue and some will say, okay, well, I don't want to deal with the makeups. It's too much headaches. Instead, I'm just going to charge a little bit less or provide discounts or provide refunds or whatever, because no, but then, okay, so fine, but then you're losing money, right? You could be charging more for your lessons if you have if you have the flexibility and the extra customer service that other schools don't have, right? So that's been my thinking, and we're gonna develop on that. That as a customer, by the way, when you make an appointment for a haircut or another activity, you can cancel it and you don't lose your money, right? And I can't think of many other services that you pay for, maybe except for the regular school, right? If you miss school, you don't get if you go to private school and you miss school, you don't get a refund for that day that you miss, right? But most of the services that you pay for, that have some kind of appointment, if you miss it, you can reschedule it, like a doctor's appointment. Of course, there's going to be limitation, 24-hour to 48-hour notice. There's going to be some kind of limitation, of course, to make it manageable. But most services that people are used to dealing with, they have the expectation that, hey, if I miss it and I give you enough notice, I should not have to pay for it, or I should have some kind of makeup or something in, right? So there's this expectation from customers. And we can argue. I'm in an area, a wealthy, affluent area in Silicon Valley. We can say we have high maintenance parents. I heard LA customers are also high maintenance. So I'm sure there's local
There's probably some
differences.
truth to that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, different level of expectation from that crowd, that industry and market that you're in. But I mean, people in general naturally are expect to, if they can't make it, that they expect some kind of not to pay for it, right? So
Right,
that's
right.
that was my thinking. Now, yeah,
So talk about what it is that you have landed on, like, because you've
right.
kind of you've painted a really good picture, and I agree with everything you've said so far. I have some thoughts, but I'll wait. But
Right.
so you've got a parent looking at two schools. Yeah, I like your school because you guys actually offer us makeup lessons. So you just said with 400 students, the SMSs are flying everywhere and the emails, and it's like there's no
Yeah.
way to
So it
track it.
quickly, that's the challenge. So it quickly becomes unmanageable, right?
Right.
And like I said, that was the big one of the biggest reason that I decided to build Opus One IO, and that all the other software out there that we were looking at just didn't work for us, because I wanted a system where I can have the best of both worlds. I can have the flexibility for the parents that differentiates my school from others.
Right.
Um, and I wanted the no overhead on my staff, because it just like I was burning out through staff and they were quitting and we had to rehire new people, train them, and it was just immeasurable. So I imagined, I mean, there's plenty of other things that we wanted to address with Opus One IO, but I imagined a way that, to me, it wasn't complicated to think like, why can't we just have a portal where people can cancel lessons on their own, have some kind of limitations, configurable, because every school is going to have different type of, different policies around that, but and give them an easy way to just book another lesson. Just like, I can go to the Apple bar, the Genius bar at Apple, and book an appointment, cancel it, book another one. Just like most people expect, in a digital world, to be able to simply online 24/7 be able to cancel something and book another one, right? Which is
Right.
true now for most dentist appointment. They can send you a text. You can say, "Oh, I can't make it," to reschedule, and these are the type of thing that people have come to expect. So getting makeups right was a big reason I built Opus One IO. So what we built with Opus One IO is basically everything I dreamed for, in a system where we can have the most flexible possible policy, with some limits, obviously, because there's got to be some limits, but in a way that has no overhead on my staff. That basically, so what ended up happening is Opus One IO lets parents, and this is all configurable. You don't have to use it, and there's different ways you can configure it. Lets people easily cancel lessons. When they cancel lessons, we're going to show them the cancellation policy. You can even have different policy per service. So maybe guitar and piano have a different policy for whatever reason, or maybe group versus private have a different policy, because that again have different impacts.
Sure.
So when they want to cancel a lesson, and by the way, I have 3 kids. They do dance, tennis, all kinds of activities. Every single activity, they do have a different cancellation policy. I don't remember it. I don't have time for this. Even my wife, who is much more involved than me on that, doesn't remember. So you have to expect that your customers don't know your policy as well as you do, because they
Right.
deal with 10 other businesses, right? So the day they need to cancel that lesson because they have a school event or a soccer tournament or whatever it is, they're going to either call you, email you, or if you trained them, educated them to use your portal, they're going to log into your music school portal, Opus One IO in this case. And in Opus One IO, they're going to easily be able to say, okay, well, we know in 2 weeks we're not going to be able to make that lesson. I'm going to click cancel. And when they do that, we show them your school policy clearly spelled out in 5 or 6 bullet points, right? What's going to happen? What limitation? Is it a late cancellation? Is it not a late cancellation? How many makeups can you get? We're going to give you a makeup credit that you can use right away. And then if you try to cancel too many lessons, at some point we give you a limit, right? So there's different configuration you can do in terms of what limits.
What do
For
you
my
guys
school,
do?
for my school we do. So we tell people it's virtually unlimited. So it's kind of a little bit ambiguous. It's unlimited with some limits, right? It's a little bit of
Yeah.
marketing fluff here. But basically what we do is we'd say, you can cancel and reschedule as many lessons as you want throughout the year. But the only limit that we say is, as first of all, it's got to be 24-hour notice, right? So
Okay.
and actually, technically, we do 20 hours. So Opus One IO lets you select exactly how many hours you do. We do 20 hours. I'll tell you why, because even though the policy says 24 hours, we found that if somebody cancels with 23-hour, difference, they're going to be like, what the hell? So that 4 hours makes a big difference in reducing drama. And it doesn't affect us that much, because let's
That's
say,
smart.
You
That's
know
very
what
smart.
I found is, let's say you have a lesson tomorrow at 3 p.m. You're gonna think about it. You may, if you forgot to cancel, you might think about it around the same time the day before. Let's say, right? So it's more
Yeah.
likely that. Funny enough, when we used Pack 13, there was a way to cancel, even though there was a lot of issues with it. But the Pack 13 did not let us change that exact cancellation time and the notification. So guess what? People were receiving that 24-hour lesson reminder, and once they received it, it was too late to cancel, and they hated
Uh,
it because they're like, you're notifying me when it's already too late to cancel. So you're trying to trap me. You're trying
yeah.
to, and we did not do that on purpose, but people thought we did, right? So it was, so now, in Opus One, will let you configure when you receive your lesson reminder. It can be by email. We do 28 hours by email, so give you a little bit more than a day, and we do 2 or 3 hours by SMS. So you get a long notification and a short notification, one by email, one by SMS. This is configurable. Every school chooses different values. But the most important thing is we send you a reminder. And if for some reason you're like, oh, yeah, no, tomorrow we have soccer, we need to cancel or whatever, then they still have a little bit of time to go online and cancel and get that makeup credit, right? Now, and the other limit that we do at my school is we let you accumulate up to 3 makeup credits per subscription. So let's say if you only have 1 subscription or 2 subscriptions, let's say you do piano and violin, you can do up to 3 makeups per instrument, essentially, that you do. But more than that, we're going to tell you no more. You're going to lose that lesson. You have to use your makeup credit. So that kind of some kind of limits that still says you can do it in an unlimited fashion throughout the year, but we don't let you do more than 3 at a time. Now, these limits, we can configure them, right? So we have
Is
customers who
is that
do.
now is that 3 per year, 3 credits
No,
per
no.
year, and then it
So it's not
resets? Or?
it's not in a period of time. It's 3 at a time. So you cannot accumulate more than 3 makeup credits that you haven't used, right? So if you use
Ah, I
them,
see.
so you could potentially cancel a lesson ahead of time, get a makeup credit, use it now, and then cancel. So let's say, typical example we give customers. Let's say they need to go away for 2-3 weeks during Chinese New Year, and we can't let them put their subscription on hold, right? So we tell them, okay, ahead of time. So in December or whatever, just cancel 1 lesson or 2 ahead of time. Use those makeups, and then because you booked makeups, you can cancel a 3rd one or a 4th one, whatever. And so they can, again, this is configurable. Some schools might not want to be as flexible. They might do 2 makeup in a period of 3 months. So you can limit by time. There's different combination of limits you can put in place. But and I do recommend to have some level of limits, because you don't want somebody that go and cancel 16 lessons for the next 3 months and accumulate those makeup credits and not want to pay for them or things like that, right? Eventually you have to pay for those lessons. So anyway, it can get so complicated, but what I want to say is that at the end of the day, what this allows us to do is 90% plus of our cancellations and makeups are completely self-booked. So my staff doesn't deal with any emails with rescheduling, right? And they only deal with exceptions. So those exceptions are going to be the once in a while, the drama, and with 1,400 students, there will be a bit of drama here and there. The late cancellation that they tell us, well, it's same day cancellation, but I'm sick, I should get a makeup. So then you can deal with it the way you want. We have a way that we do a one-time, but they have to escalate it to a manager. It's not like you can't just click online and get your makeup. In order to keep them, we might do an exception if one time, and we put a note on their account. So you can also say no if it's same day. It's same day. We don't gonna give you the makeup. It's up to you to say, especially if the customer is really angry. Do you want to keep them or do you want to let them go? Right? How wide of a net do you want? Do you really want to be too strict? Because sometimes we've lost customers by being too strict, and at the end of the day, you're losing money, right? So anyway, so there's that spectrum also within the flexible makeup policy, is how flexible you want to be, how generous. But anyway, the point is, if you offer a lot, there is basically what I'm trying to say is, with Opus One IO and the way we designed it, you can offer all that flexibility without having the overhead on your staff that makes it unmanageable. And after a few years, and even we went through the pandemic, from the moment we started using Opus One IO and we scaled from 400 students to 1,400 students, in a few years. And I can tell you, no school in the area has as much flexibility. And I can tell you that when we do customer surveys, or when students withdraw, we ask them, what do you like the most at Opus One? And number one is always a teacher. That will be always, I think, universally true. The most important
Right.
thing is your teacher, right? A
Yeah.
great teacher, there's a
Yeah.
strong bond between the student and the teacher. That's universally true. But the next thing that comes after is ease of rescheduling and online portal. Always, almost consistently, when we survey customers, they appreciate that extra flexibility. And by the way, that allows us not only to scale but to charge more than other schools, because at other schools, so a couple of things on that. I'm sure you're gonna have a lot of questions, but a couple of things that I think differentiates us from other schools that do that is, so other schools that want to be flexible but they don't use Opus One IO, then it's unmanageable. They can't scale, or they're gonna be more restrictive. And then either they get less customers than us, but also they can charge less, because when somebody pays, I don't know, Palo Alto can be pretty expensive, $300, $400 a month for lessons. And if they cancel lesson, but they still get that private lesson, they still get what they paid for, which is a private lesson, not a group lesson, not a video recorded lesson, not a nothing. You can argue like, hey, you never miss unless you really cancel last minute or you abuse the system and you have too many cancellations right at a time, you'll never miss a lesson, right? So we can charge you the most for these 48 or whatever lessons per year you're going to get, 48 to 50, whatever, depending on the holidays and closures, right? So we can say, okay, we charge you, and we talked about monthly billing, we charge you monthly for a certain amount, and we can basically max out what we charge you because you're not going to miss a lesson, right? So we get the best of both worlds. We get a system where people can cancel on their own, and they really like it, by the way, because as you know, you're also a parent. We're very busy with the kids, and another thing that I found is if you need to do your rescheduling at the front desk when you after your lesson and the kids are running around and you're late for dinner or you're late for soccer, you don't have time to stay at the front desk. What parents love is they can do it. When the kids are in bed, it's 9:30, 10 p.m., whatever. You can relax, look at your schedule, plan your next few weeks. So parents actually want, when you educate them and they know how to use the portal and they've booked their trial online in the first place, all that kind of thing, they're used to using the portal. So naturally they actually become very good at canceling the lessons ahead of time. So that opens up makeup spot for other students to book their makeups in it, right? Because we're going to talk about, those holes in the schedule, right? When you cancel. And by playing with the enrollment window and the window of opportunity where people can cancel, you can actually have a system, and this is what happens at my school, that things balance itself out, right? People cancel ahead of time because they plan their schedule ahead of time 24/7 without calling or SMSing anybody. And they can either just keep those credits for a while and book them later on, or they can right away book a makeup at another available time with their own teacher, or, and this is also configurable, sometime with another teacher, because this is another common discussion I have with music school owners. People will naturally want to do their makeup with their own teacher. They pay for that teacher, they like that teacher,
Sure.
they have that lesson on a regular basis. They'll do their makeup naturally with their regular teacher. Now, we've had people ask, and we've implemented that over time. We have an ability in Opus One IO to say, if you cancel a lesson with teacher Joe, you can only use that makeup with teacher Joe. So we have that capability if you really want it. I don't use that capability, but because I find that they will book with their own teacher by default. Now, if their own teacher is not available, because it will happen that, let's say, a family only has Tuesday nights for piano lessons, and their teacher is not available for the next 3 weeks on Tuesday. Well, we have other teachers available. We have new teachers that are ramping up their schedule that made it more hours. We have teachers that have their own students also had some cancellation. So the system kind of balances itself out. Everything balances itself out when you have a way to cancel and people do it ahead of time. They get makeup credits. They book their makeups, at different times. And that keeps, basically what happens is you keep your teachers full. And more often than not, so I would say probably 80% of the time, those holes that result from people canceling lessons get filled by other people booking their makeups, right? So it's kind of a musical chair, but nobody gets left out, right? And 90% of those rescheduling happen online 24/7 through the platform. The platform enforces the limits, the policy, etc. Customers are happy. They stay longer because they don't miss lessons. So they don't feel like they're paying for a service where they're getting, shortchanged with lessons that they missed and they still paid for, or they got something else than what they paid for initially. So your teachers are happy because your teachers basically, we talked about retention, right? How important retention is. To me, my biggest retention tool is flexible makeups, right? So your teachers get full quicker, they get full longer, right? And when there is holes in the schedule, those end up getting filled by makeups. Now, there is another dimension to this, is there's going to be cases where you have teacher absences, sickness, holidays, where you cancel lessons, and you also have a choice of, do I refund those lessons and lose the money, or do I give them makeup credits, maybe without limitations, because that's not their fault, that's my teacher's fault that they missed a lesson, but I let them also reschedule on their own or book their makeups on their own. So you're also going to have people booking makeups for the teacher absences that they can maybe book the same week or within a short period of time with another teacher, or with their own teacher when that teacher has holes. So when you add all of that up, you have a very flexible system that people love. It handles your teacher absences and teacher sickness in a way that you don't refund those lessons, but you give makeup credits, and people can book those makeups on their own. And you can have a system that scales where 90+% of the rescheduling of canceled lessons due to teacher absences or student absences get rebooked automatically by the people themselves 24/7 in a very convenient way, right? So that's the gist of it. I know there's a lot of details that you got to touch on, and I'm happy to answer those.
Well, go ahead. Finish your thought, and then I got a lot of questions.
And for my school, again, just to say what we do, by the way, musicopus1.com, you can see our policy there. It's fully open. You can go copy it. A lot of schools try to copy it, so I don't mind. We're very open about our pricing, our policy, and everything. And we try to be, the other thing I want to say when it comes to makeup is, just like when we talk about pricing, simplify your policy as much as you can. The more you streamline your business, the more easy you make it to understand to your staff when you train your staff, the more easy you make it to understand to your customer when you enroll them, the easier it is. So I've seen schools with crazy makeup policy. I'm exaggerating, but like, if it's a blue moon and it's more than 24 hours and it's another week of this, then you get a makeup. If not, you don't get a makeup. Like, if I can understand it, you think your customers will understand it or your staff will understand it? No way. And it's unmanageable, right? You have to keep track of those. So you want a simple system that scales, right? I think that's the best way to grow your business. And also you want to provide value. I mean, putting aside all the money and the business on the side, right? We know that a student will learn better with a real lesson than nothing, or a group lesson where they maybe do music theory or something else, right? Or a recorded lesson that they can see somebody playing Stairway to Heaven on YouTube as well. So why are they paying for that lesson, right? So at the end of the day, you want to provide what they paid for, so you can charge them as much as you can, and they get the value that they paid for in the first place. Now, for example, funny enough, for group lessons, we do also some group lessons. We don't do makeup for groups. If you miss it, you missed it, because the train with the other students has moved on, right? You can't really get a makeup for a group lesson that you missed. Because also group classes, have inherently a little bit higher margin, so the cost per lesson is cheaper per student. So, now, I mean, you can, we have a group program where we let people pay for a makeup, actually, where they can get a one-on-one private lessons to make up for the group lessons they missed, right? So to catch up, if they, so you can play with the different combination of that. But the idea is that you can set up different policy per survey, so between private lesson, group lessons. Now, of course, I want to say, this is what I do for my school. We also support video recorded lessons. We also integrate with LessonMate. We have a lot of schools that choose to go with LessonMate, so that's great if it works for them. We have schools that do group makeups, so we let you cancel private lesson and do a group makeup, or vice versa. Cancel a group lesson and get a private makeup. You can also configure it that way. And we have ways to restrict makeups to the original teachers. We have ways to also let people only book makeups on top of a canceled class. So I think we're going to talk about that, because you're going to talk about new students. I know that's coming. So we have added over time a lot of settings in Opus One IO to let you tune it exactly to the way you want. But I kind of still feel like the most flexible policy ends up, the chips fall in place, right? Your teachers stay full when you allow flexibility, and people are very good at canceling ahead of time. They're very good at booking their own makeups. And they will keep your teachers full longer and happier, actually. So yeah, let's. I know there's a lot of details that we can touch on. I know you have thoughts on that.
So let me unpack this a little bit, because I I'm very impressed with how you just described that. And here's the deal. At the end of the day, I talk a lot about data. We can have opinions all day long, but unless we can back it with data, then we don't really know what we're talking about until we actually, we demonstrate it, and we have data to back it up. You have data to back this up, right? You went from 400 to 1,400. That's incredible growth, right? Now, one question I might kind of throw in there is, was it just this makeup lesson policy that caused you to grow that much?
Hard to
Well,
say, right? Of
probably
course,
not,
we
but
opened
it
a
could
third
be a contributing
location.
factor, right?
Yeah, I mean, we opened a third location. We also went through the pandemic. We lost students like
Sure.
everybody else, and we
Yeah.
recovered after that. But I would say, what I do want to say though, what's for sure is that to manage 1,400 students, I don't have that much more staff, admin staff, than when I had 400 or 500, right? Because
That's amazing.
the amount of work has not. So you
Yeah.
have your amount of students grows, linearly or exponentially, hopefully.
Right.
But the amount of work should not grow, right? You should be able to scale your business without adding more bodies to it, right? I mean, you have to add more teachers. That's already a big
Of
expense for your
course.
school,
Yeah.
but no
Yeah.
admin work. Because imagine if with 1,400 students, how many makeups we deal with on a regular basis? They all automated, right? We only deal with the exceptions. We only deal with you know, 2 or 3 times a week, maybe once or twice a week, we have an escalation, and it gets escalated to a manager who makes a call on whether do we give them that extra makeup or that late cancellation or not.
Right.
And yeah, so when you only deal with exceptions, you can have the volume that's kind of done for you, right?
Sure.
And your staff will work on other things. They work on our recital planning, they work on other things, and you still need staff. I'm not saying you're going to cut out your staff entirely, but I can tell you I have schools, very large schools. Some of them, I think you might know the owners, that had 5, 10 locations, and they told me, like after they switched to Opus One IO, they're like, "Oh my God, we have admin staff. They don't know what to do anymore. Like, I don't want to fire them. I don't want to let them go, but they have so much less work than they used to.
Much
Then,
less,
and
because they're automating. They're automating a lot
yeah,
of these
because they automate
tasks.
a lot of
Right.
stuff, right? So,
Right.
I mean, obviously, I told them, hey, keep your admin staff, have them work on marketing, on sales, and other things. There's plenty of other things they can do to grow your school and your events. There's plenty of things, but what I told my staff is like, hey, you're gonna spend less time with Opus One IO. You're gonna spend less time clicking buttons and enrolling students and looking for spots and dealing with makeup, but you can spend more time talking to the customer. Give them a tour of the studio. Give them a bottle of water. Ask them about their kids. Ask them about what they expect from their music lessons. So you can provide a better human experience by automating all the busy work, but keeping your staff more focused on the customer, their kids, their
Right.
needs,
Right.
their
Okay.
expectations,
So
understanding the value that you provide, explaining the policy,
totally.
and kind of
And I agree. I totally agree. But all that being said, there's no arguing that Opus One makes things more streamlined. It's faster. I'm a huge fan. And what you've done with makeup lessons is just like a small part of what the whole program is. Like from scheduling to enrolling, like all of it is automated, which is pretty remarkable. And so just adding this makeup lesson component to the whole automation to your point, like I'm impressed. Right. And again, you've explained it really well. One of the questions that I have for you though is, and this is one of the reasons why I don't do it this way, is because when you have somebody cancel a lesson, and then reschedule the lesson, aren't you paying your teacher twice?
no. So there's different ways to deal with it. I'll say what I do, and we've helped customers, deal with that in different ways, right? There is the simple streamline way that I do, and there's the more complicated way that I don't recommend, but some people still do it sometime, and it still works. But
Okay.
I think it's just more work I try to reduce work. The less work, the more
Right.
the more
Yeah.
revenue, right? Try to maximize one against the other. So what I do is, and actually, what I do is a little bit more complicated because of California, but I'll try to keep it simple. My idea is that I pay teachers when they're teaching. So if they have a lesson, they get paid for that lesson. If there is
Okay.
no lesson, they don't get paid for that time. Now, caveat, because of California law, they still have to be paid, but I have a system where I have a base pay, which is minimum wage when they have a hole in their schedule, because they still have to be paid between lessons, right? If that happens, or for breaks or training, other
Right.
things. So we have a base pay, which is minimum wage, and then we have a bonus pay when you're teaching, where you have a much higher rate. So that still have that. Again, you don't have to do this unless you're in California or certain states that have those regulations. But And again, but it doesn't matter because sorry. So it's just to continue explaining. So when a lesson gets canceled, if you don't get paid for that lesson that was canceled, you probably will have a makeup booked at that time, and you get paid for the makeup, right? So you're getting paid for what you're actually teaching. But if for some reason, and it does happen sometime, there is somebody that just canceled that lesson with 24-hour notice, but nobody had time to book a lesson, at that time, then yes, the teacher might have a little bit of a lower pay for that hole in that schedule, right? Now, so that's the most common issue that people tell me about. It's like they can tell me like inevitably there's going to be some holes that don't get filled by makeups, right? So that's the first major fear I guess I get from music school owners. Well, here's the thing. Here is what I think about it. First of all, there's going to be so many cancellation and makeups that it's going to be pretty rare that you have holes in the schedule. Maybe a little bit more on certain weeks of where there is holidays, but most of the time, those, I would say almost 80% for me, most of the year, those holes get filled by makeups. And like I said, people are good at canceling ahead of time because they're planning their schedule ahead of time, not at the last minute. And give the mom some credits, right? They're planning ahead of time, right? and
Right.
that gives enough plenty of time for people to book their makeups. Now, another thing that's going to happen is when we have 50 teachers, we have a lot of absences. I think almost every day statistically of the week, we have an absence, a sick teacher or a time off teacher. So those holes get filled by subbing, because when somebody is out, we sub, and we will put whoever is available to sub for that lesson if the location matches. So whether it's a makeup or a subbing, those holes will get filled, right? Now, so you don't get paid twice. And in some rare case, you might get paid at a lower rate or not paid at all if there is no makeup book at that time. But I can tell you that now on the flip side, and I'll get back to that in a second. On the flip side, what's going to happen to that student that you don't give them a makeup? I can guarantee you're not going to retain the students as long. So you're going to have more churn. When you have churn, what do you have? You have holes in your schedule, right? Because that student that churns that will leave a hole in that schedule, right? Eventually. And it might take a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks for that hole to get filled up again. So when you have churn, you have holes. And when you have less churn, you have less holes. So you make up one type of schedule hole or schedule gap for another. And on average, I estimate that you have less gaps by non cancellation without makeups than with churn that take longer. And ultimately, as a teacher, if you take into account just the education side of things, you prefer working with the same students longer than having in the span of 3 years 4 different students because of churn. And those students were not serious and ended up churning because they had soccer or whatever. So you're getting the same student longer.
Yeah, churn for sure. Churn for sure is a big issue. But I want to come back to the question.
And sorry, one more thing very quickly on that point. In my experience, I have 50 teachers, 1,400 students right now. I never had a teacher telling me I don't have enough hours. They always tell me I have too many hours. I need more breaks. So when that hole happen inevitably, because there will be some holes, it's a breather for them. They know they're getting paid a little bit less, and they understand it. It's explained clearly when we hire them. But they'll practice. They'll have an extra half hour to eat their sandwich. So they usually make up. They're okay with it, right? Like I said, it's extremely rare. The only case I have teachers that tell me they don't have enough hours is when they get started, and sometimes some teachers struggle to build up their schedule, right? So those are the cases. Sometimes teachers telling, hey, my days haven't filled up yet, and we might work with them on ads or better trial conversion or whatever. But I never have a teacher that tell me I'm not getting enough hours. On the contrary, they actually want to take more time off. They want more breaks. They also want more money, but that's another discussion. But so at the end of the day, all my teachers are full. After a couple of months, they're full. They teach on average 6 to 6.5, 6 to 7 hours a day. And we reserve the room for them for the whole day, that day that they're teaching. They're all full-time. That's another thing we should talk about, that I believe full-time teachers are much better investment than part-time teachers. That's probably a topic for another day. And I never have teachers telling me they have not enough hours. On the contrary, they tell me that, teaching back to back, even with the breaks that they have, sometimes they tend to burn out a little bit, and we have to give them more time off, or we have to add more breaks in their schedule. So turns out that, at least in my experience, those extra holes here and there are not going to be a big deal at all, right?
Well, not a big deal to them, of course. No, I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about okay, so let me just give you a very specific example. So let's say you have a teacher who's supposed to teach a student at Monday at 5:00. The student can't, they go on on their portal and they cancel their lesson for that day. So now the teacher does not have a lesson. Let's just say in this example that nobody else books that
most of the time,
makeup
like
during
I said,
that time.
People will cancel their lessons several weeks in advance, or at least several days in advance. So that always gives time.
So that gets removed off the schedule.
Yeah. So as soon in Opus One IO, as soon as you self-cancel that lesson, or you can do it through an admin, you can call and say, I'd like to cancel that lesson. Admin will do it for you, but you can self-cancel on your own 24/7 weeks in advance. There's another complexity is, do you let somebody get, so when they cancel that lesson, they get a makeup credit immediately, right? Now, we also have restrictions to prevent you from using that makeup credit if you haven't paid for that lesson. That's another level of complexity that
if they want to book it 3
months from now,
month or two,
right?
Yeah.
Right. We want to make sure they actually paid for that lesson. So we have ways to restrict that as well, but let's not go into too much complexity. But that's something we've dealt with.
Well, so that kind of answers the question that I was going to ask, because I was going to say, what if somebody cancels their lesson on Monday and they reschedule a makeup lesson on Tuesday, and now you're paying the teacher for Monday at a lower rate, but then you're paying them again on Tuesday. So you're actually paying the teacher twice. So it's costing you more money because the student canceled the lesson.
Technically, yes. But again, it only happens if nobody booked their makeup on Tuesday, right? So usually what's going to happen, people cancel ahead of time. Other people will book makeups at those times, right? And yeah, I mean, if you're a school like W2, certain states where you have to pay between lessons, you may have to pay them minimum wage during that time, which allows you to calculate. It's a much lower rate, right? So you still, you pay them like a quarter or a lot less than what their full rate, maybe even more than that. But
like I mean, it could add up, right? If you have like 10 or 20 a week, and you're paying the people for lessons that they're not teaching, or a discounted amount that they're not teaching. I'm just saying that does leave kind of some money on the table.
Yeah, but a couple of things. So first of all, like I said, it balances itself out when you look at scale. It balances itself out in different ways. First of all, like I said, that makeup lesson that you pay for, that was a hole in their schedule, right? So they also expect to be paid for that hole, right? Because either they had no students at all, or they had another cancellation. So those cancellation will balance itself out most of the time. Now, you also haven't asked about the new students. We're going to talk about that in a second. But yes, so there will be cases where either you didn't pay the teacher, so they didn't get anything, and they might be upset. That's what I'm getting told. Or you still pay them a minimum wage for that time between lessons. Like I said, so it's first of all, as you start. So first of all, it allows you to scale your school. As you scale your school, you care more about the big picture, and those little things you realize they don't really matter because your profit increase and your size increase, and you can grow and make a lot more revenue, right? So what the economies of scales, right? If it allows you to keep your students and grow your school and scale over time, the little extra expenses that you may have that add up on an individual basis in the grand scheme of things, you realize that they're actually not that much. And if you don't do that, maybe you're not able to scale in the first place, right? So you may have to trade those little extra pay here and there, for a bigger business. That's
well,
I
think.
Like I said,
I mean, I think the challenge really just becomes for somebody to say, I'm gonna take that leap and just trust that if I do this, then I'm not going to get people filling all. And of course, yes, you're right. The other issue is, aside from paying teachers twice on canceled, empty slots. So that's one issue that I would have. But the second issue is, like, now those people are booking open slots where.
So we'll talk about that in a second.
Could take, yeah.
Because also what I wanted to say is, keep in mind that, we'll talk about the new students slot in a second. But like I said, what people don't think about is that students that you don't let them have a makeup will, and it's hard to give it the exact number, but more likely to churn. They're going to stay with you longer than the students that have more flexibility. So you're going to have holes in your schedule anyway because you have some level of churn, right? So there are holes in your teacher's schedule anyway for churn, for those that didn't get their makeup and left because they just didn't get what their money was worth, right? So so you're going to have holes due to churn. So my estimate is you don't have more holes due to cancellation, then you have to churn, right? Actually, in the contrary, you're getting more benefits. You provide more flexibility to your customer. You keep your students longer. You keep your teachers full. And because of that, you have less churn, right? I mean, you have less churn, so you keep your students full. So those holes that you get because of once in a while makeups not being, not those holes not being used for makeups, actually end up being a lot less than what you would have in churn anyway, because you have students dropping and then you need to enroll a new student in that spot. And remember, we were talking about how retention is so much more important because getting a new student in costs you so much more, right? And takes time. So you can have 3 weeks where a teacher's going to have a hole in the schedule because a student's churned, and you have to spend marketing money, time, and effort to get a new trial in and get a new student in. Whereas if that student hasn't churned in the first place, right, then you would have kept it and there's no hole, right? So people don't think about that.
It'd be an interesting metric to measure how much you spend on paying teachers for those empty gaps during an average month versus how many students you're keeping, like what your retention rate actually is for your school on a monthly basis.
Retention rate, but
that
also
would be
how
an
much
interesting
more
thing to measure.
and how much more you can pay, you can charge for your lessons. Because like I said, those schools that offer something different than what people paid for when they cancel a group makeup, a recorded lesson, or nothing, they cannot charge as much, because when people say, hey, I'm paying this much money, well, you're going to miss some lessons and you cancel some. So you can pay more. So you increase your revenue, you keep your students longer, you keep your teachers full. And I mean, again, I'm in Palo Alto, maybe it's its own world, maybe, but this numbers speaks for themselves. We've been growing more than other schools and keeping our students longer, because we can cast a wider net, because we can retain students longer, because we have that flexibility that we provide that differentiates us from all the other schools. And that's why we're the most expensive, or the most expensive school in our area, and we're still thriving, right?
Yeah.
And when we were more strict on makeup, because we tried, by the way, again, hard to quantify exactly, but when we were more strict on makeup, we had a lot of churn. Makeup was one of the biggest.
What did you try? What was your strategy that you tried?
I forgot exactly the different phases that we went through, but early on we experimented with like very strict makeup policy, like you cannot do more than 2 makeup per year or something like that, and people would churn, right? Because they didn't get their makeup. They're like, well, I paid $400 this month or $300, and I only got 3 lessons, and I maxed out my makeups, whatever, so I couldn't get another makeup. So, either you charge me less because I'm going to miss some lessons, right? Or I'm going to quit because, I like piano, but not that much that I'm going to spend $300 and only get 2 lessons, right? Or 3 instead of 4. So churn, makeups used to be our biggest reason for churn until we had a more streamlined and flexible policy. And now I don't think we ever lose a student because of makeups. There might be a drama here and there where a family asks for an exception on the same day. Obviously, we don't like same day cancellation because it's very unlikely we'll use that spot. So we're paying the teacher still, right? So
I think what you're saying is legit. I'm not totally disagreeing, but I don't get a lot of drops because of our makeup policy, and we do lesson mate, right?
Right.
So
well, that's good.
The thing I like
maybe
about
ask yourself, are you charging as much as you could, right? Because if they get on average, 1 recorded lesson instead of a real lesson every week or every month or every other month, could you charge them more if they were getting a real lesson?
That's a good question. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah. I think that
hard
it's
to
kind of like anything. It's like if you offer more value, like there comes a point at which that value threshold, you start reaching that value threshold, and like even if you just keep throwing more stuff at them, they're only going to pay so much. And I think part of it too is also your area that you're into. Obviously everything. It's like when I talk to a school owner from New York, it's like their numbers don't even. They're like from a different planet, It's so much higher than the rest of the country.
It's true. So there definitely some, local aspect where people expect a higher maintenance customers. They can't afford it, so they want higher quality. They're willing to pay for it, but they're more demanding with the service they get. I totally get it. By the way, we have a lot of customers using Lesson Mate, right? And doing video record lesson in different ways. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. And we actually, people who do both. We have customers who say, you can request a lesson mate. We give you an easy button to request a lesson mate in Opus One IO, or cancel and get a makeup. So maybe you do, and you can try. You can do half and half, or you can say, We're gonna let you request a lesson mate or cancel. You can choose. And maybe we give you a more limited number of makeups you can get. Maybe you can get one real makeup, but the rest has to be lesson mate. Something like so you can also find what works for you. Quick thing on lesson mate. I love the product. They make it very easy to share those lessons. It's a great product, and we work very well with it. One thing that I found on the not just lesson mate, but in general with video recorded lesson, there is one little caveat, is that many schools told me that even though the teacher still gets paid to record that lesson, and I think you did touch on that with Dave on your other episode. There is actually I don't want to say very low, but there is a high percentage of people who never watch that video. They don't ask for a refund or makeup, but they won't watch it, and then economically it doesn't matter because the teacher got paid, the school got paid, everything works out okay. But the teacher ego gets hurt because they're like, well, I did spend 15 minutes recording that video and they didn't watch it.
Yeah,
and
that actually is a good point. That's a good point. We actually recently switched our policy to where the customer has to request one. We used to just do it was an automatic lesson made that we would send it out no matter what. But we were finding that so many people weren't watching them that we finally told our customers, like, unless you press the button to actually request it, we're not going to send you anything.
So that works
and then they're not getting anything.
Yeah, so it works out better because people can just no show and they just won't have nothing, and maybe they're okay with it and they paid for that lesson but they're not getting a lesson, or they explicitly request a recorded lesson and then they'll watch it, hopefully, because if they explicitly requested it, then they're more likely to watch it, obviously.
I kind of like that though, that idea of what you're talking about having the option of doing both, and just and measuring how many people are actually going to request a makeup.
And let me give you a little
I'd be
trick.
curious to know, like, how many people are requesting in your school, like percentage wise, when they cancel a lesson, are a large percentage requesting a private makeup, or is there a good chunk that don't even ask?
Right. So a couple of things on that, but this is the trick that people listening and you could try is, at some point you're going to increase your pricing, right? We have to increase pricing. Some do it every year, some every 2 years. I do every 2 years, some every 3 years, but you got to keep up with inflation, cost, and you have to increase your pricing. Right. So guess what? It's easier to increase your pricing if you're offering something in return, right? So you don't just increase your pricing and say, hey, increasing by 10%, but so I advise a lot of customers when they switch to Opus One IO and they see, oh my God, we can do all these new things now, we can do makeups and stuff, but they don't necessarily know if they want to do it or not. What I usually tell people is like, hey, maybe don't do it right now. Keep doing what you're doing, lesson made, whatever works for you, that's good. But next time you increase your pricing, maybe increase your pricing a little bit more than you would have, but offer more flexibility and say, hey, this is our usual 2-year price increase. But guess what? You're getting two real lessons that you can use as a makeup per 6 months or whatever limit you want to put in, right? So you're offering something back, which says, hey, you're going to miss less lessons. So actually, you're not really increasing our pricing. You're getting more lessons for what you pay for. That type of thing. So that's another strategy to deal with, using the moment you're going to increase pricing to provide more value, because it's always good to feel like you're not just taking, you're also giving, right? So that's a good strategy. So again, it's a spectrum. It doesn't have to be that you have to be, only doing one thing. You could do makeups for some lessons. We also have customers who do different tiers. So if you do a level 3 teacher, you get makeups. If you do level 1 teacher, or level 1 service, you can also do tiering. You can do a mix. You can do makeup recorded lesson if you request one, or makeup lesson if you prefer that. So that way that caters to a broader audience, and you can have limits on both sides. So there's all kinds of way to do it. And I want to touch on the other point that you said about that makeup could potentially take the spot of another new students, right? So that's also something that I would argue against, because so what I recommend people doing when they do self-booking of makeups and cancellation is, and Opus One IO does that very well for that reason, is you can set enrollment windows, right? So you can say people can cancel lessons anytime, up to, let's say, 24 hours or 48 hours, because you want to give people some time to book their makeups in those spots. But you can let people book makeups in a specific window. So you can say, when people book a makeup lesson, they can only book it within 2 weeks. You cannot book a makeup lesson 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks from now. You can only book it in it could also be 1 week. So you can say current week, right? You're going to book your makeup this week and not next. And And what's going to happen is that the chance of somebody booking a makeup, let's say 10 days from now, and somebody booking a trial lesson at the same time the week before is very low, right? But if it does happen, then it's not a big deal. It happens to my school, right? We have that case. So somebody comes in for a trial, they love the teacher, they want to sign up, and we say, okay, great, that spot is going to be yours. One little caveat: next week there's already a makeup booked. So either we're going to start you the following week, or we're going to exceptionally book your first lesson at a different time. Easy. That's an easy problem to solve, right? And again, it doesn't happen that often. And when it does, people don't care. They'll be okay starting the following week or having their first lesson on a different time exceptionally, because we're also explaining to them, hey, this is the beauty of our school, the value that we provide. You have that flexibility. If you keep your spot, it's yours. Like, nobody can book a makeup on top of your spot. But if you cancel, somebody can take that spot for a makeup and you can get another somebody else's spot. And the system is online. It's 24/7. It's very flexible. So that has never, ever been a problem for us, that we lost a student, we lost a trial conversion because there was a makeup booked. There's going to be cases where your teacher might be off next week, right? So yeah, we can't sign you up just next week. We're going to have you start the following week because your teacher is on vacation next week. That's fine. That happens, right? So there's going to be other reasons why somebody doesn't convert the next week. There could be a holiday, or maybe they tell you, that happens to me too. We have people who book a trial, they want to sign up and they say, well, we cannot start next week because we already have something planned. But the following week, we're okay to start. So having that potential makeup there, or subbing, because maybe there is a hole in the teacher's schedule and we know that we have a teacher off that day and we have assigned that teacher to sub for that teacher. So there's going to be cases where a week or two in advance, you may have a makeup, you may have a subbing, you may have an absence anyway. So those cases will happen. They're easy to deal with, and they should not be the reason you don't do makeups, right? Because they're obviously much easier to deal with than having no makeups.
Well, I like that idea of putting a limit. That makes a lot more sense to me than just leaving it wide open, like 3 months, 4 months in advance. And it's like, well, now I can't use that spot for 3 to 4 months.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. So if you just limit it to 2 weeks in the future, you cannot cancel anything.
Well, you can do 1 week too. So you can give a little bit less flexibility. You can tell people, hey, you book your makeup within the current week, right? Within the next 7 days. So that will never take somebody else's spot, right? For a new student, right? Now, another thing you can play with, that's another option you can do. And that also helps in some cases. I don't do this systematically, but I do this sometime. In Opus One IO, you can set what customers are available for. So you can say these are their hours that they're available for new students, existing students, or makeups or trials, whatever. And you can also block some time for makeups only. So you can also say, maybe we do private makeup, but it's only Friday afternoon. That's your private makeup. And for this teacher is Friday afternoon, for that teacher is Wednesday afternoon. So you can play with compartmentalizing. I don't know if it's the right word.
Right. Yeah. Like your just leaving that time boxing, only
time boxing, makeup. Right. Yeah. And another thing that I used as a trick is, sometimes I had teachers actually tell me, okay, I have too many hours, I'm burning out, I want to reduce my schedule. So what I use as a negotiating tactic, and I say, okay, well, you're teaching Friday night, you're teaching also Saturday morning. I understand that teaching until 9 p.m. on Friday and teaching again at 9 a.m. on Saturday might be a little bit difficult. So let's do this. Let's cut your schedule on Friday at 7 p.m., but we're going to keep the 7 to 9 before makeups on, right? So that way you may have lessons, sometimes you won't, but sometimes you'll finish earlier. So it's a kind of a way to trim the schedule without trimming it entirely. So there's a lot of different ways you can play with those different levers, those different settings, to find the sweet spot for your market that still differentiates you from your competitors, because they do pen and paper, Google Calendar, QuickBooks, and they're archaic and they'll never grow as much as you, right? But you're offering more flexibility. You have all the things that Opus One IO can offer you, and you have all that flexibility that customers love. And trust me, kids are busy. They have so many activities. If you don't give them a way to reschedule with some limitation and in a way that works for your school, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. You have people that are going to they could have done piano for 3-4 years. They're going to do it only for 1, because eventually they're going to be like, well, we're missing so many lessons. We're not getting makeups. We're just going to stop because, soccer is too busy and we don't want to pay another $300 for piano if we're missing like 4 or 5 lessons a year. But if you say, hey, you're never missing a lesson, unless you're sick, same day sick, and yeah, you might miss that one. So yeah, in my experience, and also by the way, other school owners that were already doing makeups but drowning in emails and switched to Opus One IO and automated it, and they loved it and allowed them to scale even more. Or schools that were able to scale because they did that, maybe some other things as well. I see a lot of schools, that switch to more flexible makeups and love it. And like I said, I also see a lot of schools that just stick to whatever worked for them, and that's okay, right?
Yeah.
But at least it's a possibility that people should consider. That helps them, differentiate from other schools, because, like I said, you don't have a lot of opportunity to differentiate. Everybody has. You have to assume that everybody has great teachers. Everybody can have a Yamaha, a baby grand, and a nice, fresh coat of paint in their studio. So what else do you have to differentiate your school?
Mm.
Um, you know, than customer service, right? And I don't know. So something to think
No,
about.
it's I've got to admit, Sam, I'm impressed. You explain that very well. I mean, again, my only hesitation with it is just paying the teacher twice. But I mean, we talked about that, and I think depending on your state and the laws in your state, you might have to do that anyway, right? So
Exactly.
it doesn't
And again, it's also a matter
necessarily.
of scale, right? If let's say you had 200 students and you're happy there, and you have to count lesson by lesson to make sure you get enough profit to make it worth it, and you really kind of like, maybe you're at capacity, maybe you don't really want to scale that much, and maybe that's fine. Do what you're doing that works for you. But as you scale, you start worrying less about the per lesson. You look at your overall cost. You look at, okay, this is what a teacher costs me on average full time. This is the revenue they're going to bring. Same thing with the whole monthly payments for lessons, right? The whole thing about, um, should I charge for 4 or 5 lessons or three, depending if there's holidays, right? So when you're
Mhm.
very small, every lesson counts. You're counting lesson by lesson. So, and we do
Right.
support that. In Opus One IO, you can bill customer monthly, and it will calculate automatically if you have 5 lessons, 4 lessons, or if there's a
Yeah.
holiday, only 3 lessons. So we do support that. As we get bigger, most schools are just easier to say, we're going to do simple pricing. It's flat fee monthly. And
Hmm.
some months will have 5 lessons, some months will have four, and
Hmm.
some months will have three because there's Christmas or whatever. But on average, you're getting 48 lessons per year. And we know you're not going to be here only for 3 months. We know you're going to be there for years. So as you get bigger, you care less about that individual lesson, and you have a bigger business mind, because bigger picture view of things, where you look at your cost overall on average, and you look at your revenue overall. And as you scale, you can start doing that, and you realize that, of course, your profit increase, and your business grows, and you care less
Right.
about, okay, yeah, maybe that one we pay the teacher a little bit more or twice or whatever, but on average, we kept the students, we're growing, and all that stuff.
Well, now I agree with you, and again, like it's just a different way of approaching it. I love the how you talk about this is about limiting churn and it's all about retention. Like any school that's of any reasonable size, 300, 400, 500, once you get up to that number, it's like the number one thing that you're watching every month, or at least that you should be watching every month, is how many students did we drop last month, right? Like how is our churn doing, and is there something we can do to improve that? Like, is there something we can do? And to your point, like there's only so many different tricks and gizmos we can throw at these people to keep them with us as a differentiator. So unlimited makeups, that's a very, very cool very, very cool approach. So Sam, thanks for joining the show today. I think we covered quite a bit of ground, and we've definitely gone back and forth quite a bit on this, but I think overall you've made a pretty good case for
Thank you. Yeah, it was
utilizing
great.
Opus One IO to automate makeup so that it doesn't have to become this like logistical headache and rescheduling nightmare, which I think is what everybody is fearing. So yeah, set it up
And
this
I
way.
had a quick
Make the settings right.
point. Sorry, I know we're running a little bit out of time, but another thing that we haven't talked about also is retaining your teachers, right? Because I know
Mm,
one of my, and this is another thing I forgot to mention that's also very important. You also compete for against other schools for, is a teacher that can has the option to teach private at their home, or teach at your competitor's school or at your school. If you tell them, hey, we have a system that we're gonna, enroll students faster for you. We have a system that lets people book makeups, but while keeping your schedule full. And because I know, for example, there are schools in my area where they have teachers manage their own makeups. So And they tell teachers, well, okay, we're paying you for these hours. If somebody cancels, it's your problem. You do the emails, you do the makeup, you make yourself available on Sunday afternoon to do makeups. And great. So now what is your value as a school for the teacher that works for you, for your employee, right? They're doing almost the same thing that they would do if they taught at their own home. So you're basically just renting space for them, essentially. That's what you're doing, right? So there's a whole area that we didn't discuss much, is that flexibility and that tool and that policy, and the fact that you're handling it for your teachers, they don't have to worry about it, is also a great way to get good teachers in, because teachers want to teach. They don't want to deal with makeups and payments and rescheduling and parents' emails and that kind of drama. So by having all of that well figured out and well organized at your school, you're providing value to your teachers so they can just show up and teach and enjoy doing what they do, which is teaching, not dealing with administrative headaches.
Well, I think there's something about the idea. I mean, just so, yes, teacher retention is huge. Student retention is huge. At the end of the day, it just creates massive headache if you are if you're churning teachers, right? And you're churning students. But I will say that one of the things that I do feel that for us, lesson mate, and like I've heard of schools that lesson mate is, the concept of the lesson mate is basically sending a recording to the student during the time that you normally would have taught the lesson. It is a very efficient way to run your operation because there's nothing promised into the future. It's done. The transaction is done. You send the lesson, boom. Some people send recorded, like audio recordings. I actually was just talking with a guy in my local market, and it seems a little funny to me, like with the latest technology, but he's like literally having his teachers make recordings on their phone, like talking, like voice memos, and then sending that to the parents as their makeup, but whatever.
It works for some people, but also what kind of students you have, because they paid for a private lesson in the first place, right? And if they're preparing for a recital or an exam, that recording is only going to go so far, right? It's not really a lesson, right? So that's my take on it.
100% true. And I think that I think there is something to the demographic of the people, but I think in general, that's probably universally true. Like everybody wants to get the value of what they're paying for, and something second rate is going to be just that. It's going to be second rate. Even if it is their fault that they missed.
I just want to say, I really don't want to, lesson mate on the video recorded does work for a lot of schools. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing.
Well, it works for our school. No, it totally works. I think the only thing, and you've kind of put this doubt into my brain now, which I'm glad we're having this conversation, but just this idea of, could we charge more? Could there be a higher value per the cost of allowing them to cancel? And I think at the end of the day, for us, probably what we'll do is we'll probably test this before we do anything. So you offer the lesson mate and the option to schedule that makeup, as long as it's not, within 24 hours.
One more thing that we haven't talked about also is payroll, and that's probably a topic for a whole nother episode. But I also see schools that create a nightmare for themselves in payroll, because they're paying the teacher for the original cancel lesson, but not for the makeup, and they make their payroll so much more complicated. And I tell them, just pay them for the hour they teach. It's simpler. It does average out to the same amount of hours, and it saves you hundreds of hours a month in payroll processing. So it's just simpler to just pay them when they teach, pay them for the lesson if it happened, pay them for the makeup when the makeup happens. It's going to be a pretty full schedule anyway. They're going to get the stable pay anyway. Don't do crazy things because then if you do that, you can't let them use that makeup with another teacher, or if they do, then they got paid for a lesson they never really taught because another teacher taught that makeup, right? So there's a whole aspect of how you pay your teachers when you do cancellations and makeups, and my recommendation is simplify. I see people doing crazy payroll systems that also makes it a nightmare for themselves, and very error prone, and the end of the day, as a business owner, we want no operations to do. We want everything to run smooth by itself.
Well, yeah, I mean, we if somebody cancels within 24 hours, so like in my state, we still have to pay the teacher for that.
Yeah, and that's fair.
We still have to pay the teacher their teaching rate, because their schedule was 24 hours, like 20, whatever, because we send them their schedule the night before
Right.
they're
Yeah, that's okay.
their
That's completely okay,
teaching day.
regardless of your laws. Even, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, in Opus One IO, when you have a late cancellation, it's labeled late cancel, and you can make sure your payroll is set that they still get paid for it. So that's never an issue. I think everybody agrees that even if you want to be flexible with your customers, a late cancellation, the teacher has to be paid. Now it's up to you as a business owner to say, okay, I paid my teacher because I owe them that, right? By law or because it's the right thing to do. Now, do I still give the customer an exceptional makeup? That's your decision as a business owner. But it's decoupled
Right.
from whether you pay the teacher or not, right? You're a business. You're not just passing through revenue from your teacher to your students, right? Or from your students to your teacher.
And I think
You're a
that's the
business owner.
leap. For me, that's the leap. That's the leap that you're having to make. You're having to if you really buy into this idea that you're talking about, that's the leap that you have to make. I got to pay my teacher essentially twice.
Because the thing is, as you know, we talked about this before. In our industry, you don't go and do an MBA and open a school with 1,000 students overnight. You start as a solo teacher, then you hire another one, then another one. So you go from a very lesson by lesson, hour by hour, almost revenue share model when you hire new teachers to, as you start growing, you realize, okay, I'm running a business here. I'm not just passing through revenue from student to teacher, right? I have to make decisions. And sometimes, yes, you're going to take a hit as a business where you pay your teacher, you pay your employee, but you give a makeup anyway because you want to retain that students long term, and you take a hit there, right? Just like any other business, essentially, that if your customer complain, you give them a refund, but you still pay your employee, right? You're not going to not pay your employee because a customer complains. So I think it's that's another whole topic, but I think there's an evolution of the music teacher turned business owner that takes time. That as you grow, you go through these stages where you start looking more at the big picture and really thinking about it as a business, really, than just a rev share or a simple operation.
Absolutely. Well, Sam, thank you for being on the show. We've got lots more to talk about, which we will reserve for another episode. But every time you're on here, it is very enjoyable, and I learn something every time. So let's keep it going. But again, thanks for being on.
Yeah, looking forward to the next one. Thanks for having me.